And one of the things that catches me is the term safety first. What does that mean?
Safety has always begun with strong neighborhoods. It has always begun with neighbors looking out for neighbors. And again, we have this idea that government has to be all things to all people. Obviously, we need a strong police force and a strong fire force, but we also need to be responsible toward each other. And one of the real questions that I have when I see those signs is, safety first is the slogan, but knowing that we have a hiring freeze on our police and firefighters, knowing that we have 300 less police officers and 150 less firefighters than we had 3 years ago, but yet we still have the money to have 2 brand new police precincts, police stations that were paid for out of a different pot of money. We've stretched those police officers that we have very thin. And so the question becomes not just quantity, but also quality. And I am very concerned about the hiring freeze and this potentially 5-year gap between hiring new police officers and having them on the streets. That is going to impact our ability to provide good services, not just for right now, but also we're missing out on them gaining that experience so that we can continue to have good public safety in the future. So those are some of the concerns that I have for our safety and firefighters, and that's one of the reasons that I'm running for office, so we can figure out a way to streamline some government services so that we can put those people back on the streets.
My follow-up question to all of this is, within the city of Phoenix, there are gang problems in different communities. How would either of you address those issues with the budget you have now? And do you really believe there is a solution to them that goes deeper than just law enforcement? I'll let you start that one.
One of the things that I've done on the board of directors of Maryvale Revitalization Corporation is we've worked very closely with the police department to attack the gang issue by focusing on what typically is one of the first crimes that gang members do, which is graffiti. We have, through the efforts of Maryvale Revitalization, working with the police department, we've actually put criminal graffitiists behind bars through a program in conjunction with the Arizona Prosecutor's Office. And so that is a success that we've actually had out on the streets through our efforts. Ultimately, you're talking about gang activity, you're talking about organized activity, and many of the cuts in our police department have come from specialty programs, specialty departments. And that is one of the significant concerns that I have, is that when we continue to cut those programs and continue to cut those specializations, we're putting ourselves further and further behind the curves. Again, if we look at different ways to streamline government and look for cost savings, before we got into this position, we'd be in a much better position to continue that fight that we're going to have against the gangs and against organized criminal activity. But we need to make sure that we stay ahead of the curve. We need to make sure that we continue to have strong police presence. And again, we've got to rely on the neighborhoods to be able to comment and to trust our police force to let them know when they see that activity so that we can address it right from the get-go.
My backup question to that is we're dealing with the crime after it's happened. What I want to know is, what would you think you could come up with, because I used to do this in California, to work at it more effectively at the level of, say, elementary and junior high school before they get into the gang? What have you developed within your own thought processes to come up with some solutions while the children are still children, before they get affected or infected with the attitude that they can go out and do these things in the communities in which they live? How much of a program would you have to implement and start it at that level? And I realize part of it has to float over into the family and neighborhood, but do either of you have a plan or an idea of how that could be done? And we'll start with Thelda.
I try and put those answers together. I try and put together the answer from safety first, where we talk about gangs being in existence for 20 years, and then I try and put together all of the great successes that we've had. And it seems to me that the programs that are mentioned, the DARE programs and different things like that, are tools that were implemented in the 1990s that we're still using. Life has changed, society has changed, and one of the things that I think that we need to be looking at is, how do we effectively utilize social media? How do we effectively utilize those types of ways to find the activity before it gets to the point where they're full-fledged gang members? How do we find the root causes in our schools before they become entrenched and we can't root them out? It is a changing society. Facebook has changed the world in 3 years. Using the same tools that we've used for the past 20 to try and fight gangs isn't the most effective way to do it. We need to augment those services with new services, be on the cutting edge of technology, which is how a lot of people communicate. And then we need to have neighborhoods, not necessarily just parents, but neighborhoods trained on how to spot this activity. A lot of times parents become in denial about some of the issues that their kids have. And it's the neighbors, and it's the friends, and it's their parents that are the ones that realize the problem and have no way of knowing how do we let people know about the problem. And so that's part of where our outreach needs to be as far as our community groups, our block watches. We need to have that information out there for them to be able to identify it, know where they need to take that information, and then act upon it once we have it. And it doesn't need to be government all the time. Our churches absolutely need to play a cornerstone role in this. Our schools need to play a cornerstone role in this, and our neighborhoods need to play a cornerstone role in this.
Does anybody else have a question out there before I ask another one? John?
I do have a follow-up
All right.
on yours,
Sure.
on your answer. What specific, since you haven't been there, I can't ask you what you've done.
Sure.
But what specific plans do you have to implement keeping the kids out of gangs?
Well, again, without being in there, you certainly can throw out ideas, but making sure that you have the resources to follow through on them is just as important. And so, again, making sure that we don't isolate our police force to only being on the streets, but that we have those resources available to be able to do the training on the Facebook and do the training on social media, making sure that we have partnerships throughout the city so that it doesn't just have to be government, but it can be those church groups, the school groups. Realistically, the training program that Thelda has probably has a lot of young folks who are very up to speed on a lot of this technology, and so creating that program and creating an idea that we need to look at that so that we can implement it is really how we're going to get to the fundamental part of the problem.
Anybody else out there? No? Okay. The city of Phoenix, being the 6th largest city in the state, in the country now, some of what they do, and Thelda was on the show today, and they were under federal regulations. I asked her a question on the show about the lighting system in the city of Phoenix, where the poles are so high that the light doesn't hit the ground. And I consistently watch people getting hit by cars in the city. You see people jaywalking, and they're, this guy got killed, that guy got killed. Is there anything either one of you can think of where the city could possibly get themselves out of some of these programs for the safety of the citizens, rather than for the dollars that are, I guess, poured upon the city if you follow these regulations? I understand it's tempting to get money from the federal government to do certain things. However, I also look at the detriment of some of the things we get from the federal government, what they do to the cities, the counties, and the state. And I think by accepting some of the money we get from them to offset some of our own costs, we're adding to the problems we have. So is there anything you can do, whether it's the lighting or other things within this city, or state for that matter, that you can think of where you can kind of exit a program, whatever it might be, to possibly come in with some more innovative ideas to fix some of the problems and leave the federal government out?
City of Phoenix receives 36% of their annual budget from federal programs. The reason that we have fear to stand up to Washington is because 36% of our budget comes from federal programs. In order to have the courage to be able to stand up and identify what programs we should follow and what ones can we not have the thumb of the federal government on us, we need to have a fresh set of eyes and ears down at City Hall. We need to have somebody that's willing to have the leadership to take a look at those positions and a look at those programs, identify what do we need and what can we do better. When we accept federal regulation on as many issues as we do so that we can continue that 36% funding to come from the federal government, we are allowing ourselves to be controlled. And again, I'm a firm believer in the Constitution of the United States of America. And there's a lot of things that we do as a city that are not mandated in or allowed in the Constitution. And so we need to take a look at those programs. We need to have an honest debate and an honest discussion about what we can and cannot do and where we can and cannot get out from underneath the thumb of federal government. And I can tell you have a question, Chuck.
Yes, I do.
All right.
As a follow-up to that,
Sure.
since you haven't had a chance to be in there,
Right.
would you be willing to, is right now you would be one voice out of 9,
Mhm.
maybe perhaps 2 out of 9.